know that we have more work to do, we are committed to ensuring that everyone who studies and works here is able to be themselves, bring their diverse identities into the UE community, and experience welcome, belonging, and experience welcome, belonging, and an environment that enables us all to give our best and access opportunities equally. We are really pleased to be able to be welcoming Roger Griffith with us as part of our series for Black History Month here at UE Bristol. Throughout the course of this evening, we'll be discussing the Bristol bus boycott and the legacy of the UK race relations. Roger is a social entrepreneur at UE and a UE Bristol lecturer, helping to diversify the curriculum whilst working on a number of community engagement and social action projects. These initiatives include consultation, media, employment, and diversity activities. He was the executive chair for 11 years at Ujima Radio, where he was also a broadcaster. He's a keen writer, and he's published his first book, The American Odyssey, From the Windrush to the White House, Volume 1, in 2015, about the American Deep South, comparing America and Britain during the term of the first Black president, and his own family's journey as part of the Windrush generation. In March 2008, Roger was awarded the Lord Mayor's Medal for his community and voluntary work on race equality. He is currently researching and drafting his second book, Reflections Across a New Black Atlantic, combining his personal insights, experiences, and connections across the African diaspora. In 2019, he was awarded an MBE for services to diversity in the arts. Thank you all everyone for taking the time to be in with us today. We really hope that today will provide you with stimulating conversations, and most importantly, that you will continue these discussions before the time that we have together. My colleague Valerie will be providing technical support as the event moderator. We'll be live tweeting over at UE Equality, and that will be overseen by my colleague Vicky. Please do tag us in your conversations about this event, and you can follow Roger Griffith on Twitter as well, with Roger G44, and use the hashtag Black History Month, because we're really keen to make sure that other people are able to hear about the great kind of stimulating conversations that we will be having tonight. Just a little bit of general technical housekeeping in terms of how this works, because Blackboard Collaborate is a new platform for us, and especially for any kind of any of our attendees here tonight. So this session will be recorded to allow others to view the event afterwards, and there will be all the events that are being hosted for Black History Month will be promoted through our university YouTube channel in November. So don't worry if for any chance any of your friends or colleagues have missed it, there'll be opportunities to be able to catch up on it. Please ensure that you keep your microphones muted and also switch off your cameras. All interactions with attendees, especially given the numbers and just for us to kind of manage, will be done through the chat box, which you've already been doing, and we'll be able to respond to kind of any queries as they come. Please do share your thoughts on the chat for any kind of stimulating conversations that you feel that are happening, and obviously also on Twitter for kind of wider engagement. If you do have any direct queries in terms of anything technical, please feel free to message Valerie directly or one of us as moderators, and we will be more than happy to help. The way that tonight is going to go is that we will be having 45 minutes with Roger, who will be sharing his thoughts, and afterwards we'll be having 20 minutes for a Q&A, which will be hosted via menti.com, which will allow you to submit your questions, and then we'll be able to share them with Roger and the rest of you for them to be answered. So please, as much as possible, if you're able to either drop your questions down in a piece of paper that you have in front of you and hold all your questions till the end, then we'll be able to answer them. Obviously, however, if you do have any critical technical challenges, then please do contact us. You don't have to wait to the end of the session to ask for any help or support. So with that, it's my great pleasure to be able to welcome Roger Griffith MBE to give us a talk on this evening on the Bristol bus boycott and the legacy of the UK race relations. Thank you, everyone.
Hello and thank you, Louise, for that excellent introduction. Can you all hear me okay? Just something in the chat to make sure I'm there, not just talking to a screen. Excellent. Thank you, Nia, Valerie, Rihanna. Yes, Meg. Let's go. Let's get this started. Thank you so much. So, delighted here to talk today. During Black History Month, you'll see that our opening slide are going to focus on Bristol today, which I've been delighted to introduce more of which and more of our great culture into the curriculum at UWE. So I'm going to talk about the Bristol bus boycott and its legacies, its various legacies that take place. Can I have the next slide, please? So that's a little bit there about me, as has been introduced by Louise. Thanks for that. Also great to just to say about my consultancy, Creative Connect. It's currently we've got many UWE students working for us as well. One of them did one of the logos there. That's Benjamin James, my former intern, is now part of my team as well officially, as well as Millwood Downey. So I'm really connected to UWE in different ways. So as I've said, I'm a very strong social activist and arts champion. I believe in arts as being as part of the something that makes and engages change, and I specialise really in bringing partnerships and people together. Have the next slide, please. So, just going to run through today what I'm going to be talking about Bristol and the Caribbean, and those links there. Talking about the Windrush legacy, through the campaigners that who worked upon it. Obviously, we'll cover about the Bristol bus boycott and its history, and also its legacies in Bristol, in Britain, and that global legacy. I'm going to touch on the my generation, things that happened after the Bristol bus boycott. And again, that heritage of reaction and rebellion, the impact that it had, and the various contributions that are still there today, and where we are today in Bristol. But more importantly, I really want to kind of understand from yourselves about what you're thinking and feeling about the subject, and also you're looking forward to your questions. Can I have the next slide, please? So, in the beginning, if I'm going to do something about legacies as a lecturer, I'll be teaching for the first time with history, but I do it with lots of creative writing. I have to go back to the beginning and the legacies, really, that formulate why such discrimination takes place? Why are we still talking about things like structural racism and like centuries years on? I'm not going to go into great depth about this, but I do feel that you're going to need a little bit of understanding of some of that history. Some of that history of people taken out of Africa, many millions of displaced people. Just this week, it was a Indigenous a day across the globe. They were displaced in the Caribbean, in the Americas, in North America, as well as the South America, as well as places like New Zealand and Australia. All of that made that Commonwealth. It's Britain, and I'm very proud to be British, but that's where that empire has come from. Come from the people and taken and some places stolen land and people that we need to reflect on, and that we're going to move through. Can I have the next slide, please? So TAST, just my shorthand, transatlantic slave trade, triangular slave trade, again with the Bristol, the city that you live in, the city that you study in, the city that I'm again proud to be a Bristolian of, had a lot of its industry and its commerce coming from the slave trade. Boats that would set out from along the River Avon, set out through to Africa to capture people in its millions through to the into the Caribbean. Even at the point of the American independence, the Caribbean was richer than the American 13 colonies that Britain were defeated for. So that the United States and Valerie gained its independence back then. Quite a staggering thing to kind of get your hand around, but that's how much those slave-filled islands, the indigenous people, the Tahinos, the Caribs, Arawaks were wiped out from smallpox and moved aside. And African people were put in their place, but not in paid labor, in enslaved-free labor. Those are the roots that lead us forward where we are today. Have the next slide, please. Roots and roots is my next slide. Rebellion and resistance. Now, when we talk about the transatlantic slave trade and abolitionists, we need to look at both sides of the story and both sides of the coin. And the rebellion and resistance is a theme of the Bristol bus boycott as well. It's a theme of collaboration. On one side, you had in the UK a set of abolitionists, particularly here in Bristol, which I'm going to come to in my next slide. But you've got people like Wilberforce being part of that gradual erosion of slavery here over decades, as well as in America. This is where these connections are built. If you think about people like Frederick Douglass, who was born without a name, came over into Bristol, was people paid in Bristol, Britain and Ireland, paid for his freedom, spoke to packed houses that we've had here in Burton, Bristol, Old Vic, where we had the mayor and Kwame Kwei-Armah and Vanessa Kasule and Dr. Rose Hudson recreating his whole life. Again, these roots are really connecting us here in terms of those things about rebellion, but also rebellion in the Caribbean. If you look through the slavery ended 1807, you think, oh, that's the end of it. 1808 and 1807 in terms of transatlantic slave trade, not one bit of it. In the Caribbean, it still continued well into the mid 1830s. And you had rebellions in Barbados and Bussa during the 1810s, and Kumina in my home country of Guyana, and then a gentleman named Sam Sharp and his rebels on top of Nanny Maroon as well. Great people who carried out rebellion and resistance during that period of time. These people are kind of erased from some of that history book. This is the thing about people fighting back for their own freedom and emancipation, for their own free rights that gives us the legacies that we have today. People like Paul Stevenson and Roy Hackett and their great campaigners. I argue that those essence of fighting for those rights going right the way through are laid in that rebellion there in the Caribbean and through the Americas. Go to the next slide, please. Back in Bristol, as I said, you had this battle Colston statue where it stood, which I'll come to later, and the godfather of slavery, in my opinion, Edward Colston. But you also had the other side of it. Again, look at these two sides of Bristol. You had people boycotting sugar, the drug of choice of its day that sweetened things, but people boycott it. Bristolians were part of that. Again, in Bristol, very, very rebellious streaks with part of it. Very genteel in parts, but also when you think about the riots of Queen Square in 1831, people and the Charterists rising up against the people who had money, and that goes right the way through to like the boycott of apples, very strong. When I was growing up, Rock Against Racism was strong here. Socialist Workers Party, a lot of things that were here in Bristol. Got the next slide, please. Going to move us forward to the Windrush generation, and again, I'll touch upon that shortly. But once more, we had those people coming across, invited guests from Britain, part of that Commonwealth, part of that empire. My parents were part of that. Roy Hackett came from farming land out into the of Jamaica to come here. Never actually saw his parents again. He was very sad and upset by that. But imagine leaving your homeland. The streets were paid for with gold. Instead, they were paid with cold stares and ostracization in places, in housing, jobs where people had people like Roy and my father had to start at the bottom of the employment market, despite their qualifications back in throughout Caribbean lands. Not only just from the Caribbean, I'm going to add to that the great contribution of our Asian cousins who came from there, from across the Commonwealth and that empire again. So Britain had taken its resources. It had manufactured things in the East India Company and the West India Company that led to slavery. Then later on, through that great independence that was through Africa, through through Asia, and through the Caribbean, and that then led through to the late or mid 20th century of this exodus of people coming to help rebuild the country after World War II. Because after all, this was the mother country. This is what my parents laid down to me. They thought they were told everything that was British. They knew more about the Queens and Shakespeare than they did about any kings and queens. This was the same for in many communities in Sheffield or Chapeltown in Leeds or Moss Side in Manchester or Liverpool and Toxteth or Handsworth in Birmingham. Black communities emerged, coming out of from first of all landing in places like Tilbury Docks, which led to Clapham Common, which led on to Brixton, the metropole of the black community empire that built out, and then burgeoning out into places like St. Paul's itself. Have the next slide, please. And so when they arrived, why we've got a great kinship with our Irish friends, because we understand that oppression. Those were the signs that were in the houses. I talked about employment primarily. I talked about housing, and many had to do things like partnering, sleeping many to a room. Paraffin heating was a great thing. You could tell who was huddled together in rooms, houses of multiple occupation, 6, 7 people to a room. Couldn't get any loans from anywhere, so I had to partner together, as in collective, co-op, as we would know them today. So those were the harsh conditions that were there. As well as that, you couldn't even drink in a pub. If you were served, you would have an omnipresent atmosphere of violence and retribution from the locals and other places that you weren't. Paul Stevenson, one of the leaders of the Bristol bus boycott, was refused from a Bristol pub, which is not far from Jima Radio, the Bay Horse, by sheer coincidence. But that was what it was back in the day. So we can look to America in many respects, and I do, for those inspiration, those stories. But right here under my nose, these things were going on, and it's not only through people like Roy and Paul and Guy Reed Bailey as well, but many thousands of migrants who were proud of their country had to go under the same suffering. You have these different systems, and they built great things in doing so. Next slide, please. One of the great things that they built were communities, and from where things are forged from oppression, things can still shine. And a community here that was built was the St. Paul's community in Bristol. There are many other communities that I've mentioned them in Handsworth and Toxteth and the like, but here in Bristol, this one was set up through and talking to Roy and interviewing on several different occasions from a guy called Owen Henry, provided community leadership. We had people from all around the Caribbean, predominantly Jamaica, but he managed to get them into unified places. He was their leader. If I'm talking to Barbara Dettering, herself from what was then British Guyana, now Guyana, again, my country where my parents are from, they all speak about the leadership that Owen Henry gave. He's on a mural that in the centre of St. Paul's themselves. But they had to literally forge their own associations. They had to forge them through their own housing associations to make sure that there was housing. Don't forget the housing that you see today was pretty much unsanitary back then. Back-to-back housing was just being demolished. Outside toilets, very cold, no central heating. So things like United Housing Association. There was an arts association which Barbara was Dettering and was part of. West Indies Cricket Club. Sports, dominoes were very vital, important things in building those community links. People just don't want to just go to work and back. They have those social clubs. One of the best ones at the world was the Bamboo Club, where there was a plaque now in Portland Square. Even people like Bob Marley played way back when. Desmond Dekker, just after he had a #1 hit in Britain, played at the Bamboo Club. People used to come from miles, they tell me, absolutely miles, all in their Sunday best, dressed finely, 3 floors, restaurant, nightclub, and great jams that they had. And they had great leaders and pioneers in Tony and Lil Bullymore, who were a mixed couple at the time, very unusual in those times, and was looked down on both from both communities. But they had a very strong marriage until obviously Tony passed away a few years ago. But they had a place where people could come and a place of unity as well. So these social constructs again forged that unity together. Things like the sickle cell, where we suffer from in terms of our Caribbean communities, suffer more, as do the Asian community as well. So it's the cell thalassemia set up, and things like later on in the 80s, seed employment, which gave me my first start in employment 10 years after leaving school without any qualifications. So these institutions, these social clubs, these community spirits, I argue, forge what we have here in Bristol today, and it also forged the Bristol bus boycott. Can I have the next slide, please? So if you think about all the coming together, all of those things, these things didn't just happen out of a clear blue sky. You had a people who were coming together through some through oppression, some through deprivation, but still wanted to be unified. And in that case, they had what was known as the Bristol bus boycott. And Paul Stevenson, he was a firebrand. He was a community worker and a community activist in London before moving here. He was different. I've given you a very quick historical route through the Caribbean and talked about the Windrush experience. But Paul was born here. His memoir is The Black Englishman. And he was born here. I come out the RAF services, so we have to be careful about where we stereotype and where we place the different routes of how people came here. Paul was very much different. He was from London, born here, didn't have the same attitudes as those who would come over and grown up in the shadow of the Commonwealth and the metropole based on the Queen. He had none of those hang up. So he was very much an activist, and a community sports worker. He later went on to be one of the first people to, for instance, desegregate a hotel in Virginia. He worked on the anti-apartheid and sports club in later on during the late 60s, and became a banned person for South Africa as well. So very much activism was in his blood. And he mobilized the black community and came up with a plan where Roy Hackett and with Gary Bailey went up and applied for a job where the colour bar, and the colour bar was very interesting because it wasn't something that was necessarily done by the Bristol Ombudsman, although they take responsibility. It was a union initiative, very much a protectionist is what we know for, and they've gone on to since very much apologise and support many campaigns. But interestingly enough, how they perceived that. They thought that black people are taking their jobs, and it's still that fear. Again, I release this information to you to look at these tropes that we see around migration and immigration, and how that they still survive today. And if we allow them to fester, we still get the same limited belief sets in terms of immigration and migration. The contributions of the people of the Caribbean, the people of Africa, the people of Asia, the people of the Commonwealth to its to Britain, which comparatively is a tiny country, absolutely overwhelms anything that we're in terms of the negative and positive. There's far much more of those contributions. You think about your daily food. If you want to, whether it's a Caribbean food or the number one dish of a curry, even your friendly banana, all of those have been introduced through its connections, through its cultures, throughout its Commonwealth over the years. These three individuals were the leaders. They were very much more students listening at home. They were all part of that, and they started this Bristol bus boycott in April 1963, studying the leadership of what happened in 1955 from certain Rosa Parks who refused to move from her seat. People think that those things are easy. They're not. The Bristol bus boycott lasted months. Montgomery lasted over a year, and people were intimidated. They were spat at. They had to walk miles to their jobs. And they brought the city of Montgomery in Alabama, which I visited many times. There's a fantastic museum there, Peace and Justice Memorial there. But it's a real city of still the cradle of Confederacy that's there. Here in Bristol, that model of rebellion, of resistance that I spoke about earlier, that was in these people's DNA, was taking place. Barbara has spoken that she was just mobilized to go along and help in whatever way she could. Other students took part in the boycott. Roy himself laid down on Lawrence Hill in front of the buses to stop them from going forward. And as I say, many others took place in terms of taking down the Bristol bus boycott. Started in April, and then, can I have the next slide, please? On a day that you quite simply couldn't make up, the gods smiled in terms of the calendar, and on the 28th of August 1963, you had the I Have a Dream speech from Washington, D.C., a place that still kind of resonates, and obviously in 3 weeks' time we'll have a decision that will quite literally, in my opinion, change the world in terms of if we continue to have a white supremacist doctrine coming out of the White House. On that day in Washington, 1963, you had Dr. King in front of millions, and on the same day, the leaders of the Bristol University and the unions decided to end the colour bar, as they called it then, and Rangovir Singh was the first black or Asian bus driver who was allowed to use the buses. It was a significant moment. It was a significant moment in terms of employment and moving forward. And again, we're not talking about advancement. We're not talking about the very basics of system. Social lives, in the right to have a social life, the right to have decent housing, the right to be, to be able to go on a job and be judged for that on your merits. That is the basics that we're saying. When we talk about Black Lives Matter today, those words are still resonant then. They've always mattered. Black Lives Matter have always mattered, from the first slave that was tossed over the side of a slave ship casually, and in some cases claimed for within insurance. This is what we are fighting for in terms of our justice and telling our stories. And on that day, it aligned in 1963. I'd also argue 8 years earlier, before then, you had the murder of one Emmett Till, again something that had catapulted a generation like Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali and Martin Luther King, who saw a young teenager murdered, much like later on that Stephen Lawrence had been. So these things that we have in history, they can mobilize and generate, but it also forges that spirit of rebellion and resistance. And remember that date, 28th of August 1963, the end of the Bristol bus boycott, and in Washington DC, the Martin Luther King speech. But it didn't stop there. Have the next slide, please. Just want to touch upon just some of the legacies. I want to touch on Paul's wife, Joyce, who actually, again by a coincidence, who did her nursing, a very proud nurse over at Glenside. As well as Princess Campbell as well. So we had a very strong contribution on that was based on gender as well in terms of the employment. They themselves had their own racism. Like my mother was a nurse, my aunties were nurses here. From 1948 to the present day, contribution of Commonwealth nurses has been again immeasurable. Only now that we're seeing some of that recognition. Saw that from even in the Olympics of 2012 and London. Just a little like slice and saying about our contribution of our nurses. Apart from that, not really much on the map, but we should salute them at every single turn that we have. So I just I slept in a little bit there just so that we had the men front and central in this campaign, and there was plenty of women behind. And we know that our women, such as my mother and Joyce Stevenson, sadly has passed away, provided great inspiration in terms of being the bedrock of the fight against racism in the UK and across the world. Have the next slide, please. Moving back to the Bristol bus boycott, the book there again, from coincidence, from former UE lecturer Madge Dresser, a great inspiration to many of us in Bristol. There, it's called on the black and white on the buses. What happened next was extraordinary. We had a young member of Parliament, Tony Benn, an ennobled person. Himself went to public school, but he was a class warrior, if you like, and he was a member in Bristol. He was excellent in his orator, and what he did was when the Labour government came in under Harold Wilson. A few months later, I think it was next year, 64, the Race Relations Act, the first Race Relations Act, was put forward, and Tony Benn was a key part of that. In 68, that was strengthened even further. And in terms of the Race Relations Act, again, this is it's just a right for equality around those issues that I talked about: housing and social and employment. From that template, that has been used across for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer, and the like. Also for around age equality, also around disability rights, around gender rights especially. Now we've got things of maternity rights. That key thing that you can have a disadvantaged group, a group that's been treated less favorably, that there'd be rights that bring them now that we know as the equality rights for all. So from that campaign from 1963 itself, taken from America, itself taken from rebellion and resistance from the days of the transatlantic slave trade. We have the rights enshrined that we still sadly have to fight for to this very day. We have that within the curriculum, but we can now challenge and say, because I didn't grow up with this story, I'm about to learn all of this secondhand. When I came to, I grew up here. I grew up schooled here in Lawrence Weston, London boy, but schooled here. No one told me about Paul Stevenson, Roy Hackett. But lucky enough, through that activism, through that sense of community, that these knowledge was passed on. And I managed to tell these stories not only today, but also through my radio programs and radio station and people that work with, continue work on films and promote that. At the 50-year anniversary, had a great open debate where we worked with BBC Bristol, and we had a live debate about that with the current mayor, Marvin Rees. Paul himself continues to this day, sadly, he's ill health, but he's still alive and still with us. But he set up things like the Legacy Commission, which had education at the key of this, and gave out lots of mini grants to different individual foundations, including ourselves at GMA. So that's some of the legacy that was contained there. Go to the next slide, please. So remember, what I've said around these communities. Remember I said about rebellion, and remember I said about resistance. And now I'm going to talk about riots and uprising and things that were occurring when it comes to my generation. Because my generation were different to my parents' generation, to Roy, and they were older and more deference. But we, during the 80s and 90s and late 70s, grew up with racism still entrenched. So we had 63 Bristol bus boycott, 65 First Race Relations Act, 68 the Second Race Relations Act. You might look in the history book thinking, oh, that should be good, that should have quelled nothing. Not a bit of it. It still continued on and on during those decades, where you'd have, again, the housing was still poor. So you had areas in what was known as then ghettos occurring. And those areas were known then as in Bristol within St. Paul's. It wasn't. It was a sense of community there. I studied there. I did my community education and my community learning, and as I said, I went on to do my studies later on. However, there was 3 million unemployed at the time I left school in 1981. The year before that, in 1980, on the 3rd of April, the same month of the Bristol bus boycott, we had the first urban uprising. Now, there have been several riots during the which were race riots, again related to either racist abuse. We had Oswald Mosley's black shirts on the streets at that point. The incidents of black men being attacked because they were dating white women. Again, something you think belongs to some maybe the Deep South. It used to occur here, and we had the riots in St Anne's in Nottingham and in London during the 1958. Which were termed race riots. This one was a raid on the Black and White Calf. Again, a name you as a script writer I couldn't make up, but that's what the cafe was called. And people had had enough by that time, and they fought back against the police. Whether you call it a riot, whether you call it an uprising, that's on your politics. The facts are that due to the unemployment, due to the stop and search, sus laws, which are still around today, being pushed down and your face down onto the pavement. There wasn't anybody I'm good friends with the police crime commissioner. There was no one like her to appeal to. The police themselves, and obviously it's still got issues, but I'm just talking about what was happening then. Big Black Mariahs with special patrol groups on the edge of St. Paul's, just waiting for trouble. You'd look into one of those and you see 6 white faces, and they're all giants back then when I was growing up, because we looked so small then. Those are the types of oppression that was going then. went through Brixton in 81, also Toxteth in 81, also through Handsworth a bit later, Tottenham not far from where I was born in 85. You had this very, very intensive, oppressive government state policing. Also seen then I have to allude to the violence that was around in the country. It's not a pacifist country, from National Front and far right extremist groups who used to go around doing things like beating up gays for fun, and also pea bashing, as what they would term it. Those were things during the 80s and 90s. And also a thing in 81, again, which really mobilized a community, and it still pains me to this day. 1981, 13 dead, nothing said. The murder of 13 teenagers at a party, and their deaths, a petrol bomb or something was put through. To this day, nothing was said about it from either the royal family or the then sitting Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher. To this day, no one of those assailants haven't been brought to charge. To this day, unfortunately, it still remains something at the heart of our black community in terms of criminal injustice. Black lives have always mattered. Black lives have mattered then. They mattered since the days of slavery, and it's continued to matter all the way through these injustices. Can I have the next slide, please? So I just wanted to, before I bring it to our time for discussions in 5 minutes or so, is to talk about the impact of all this on myself, and the personal odyssey of my own. All of this knowledge, as I said, didn't come around from school. I actually hated history, believe it or not, at school. Couldn't stand it. I tell you why, because it was just full of dead white men. Nothing against them. I learned about them quite a lot to this day, but didn't really engage me in any way. Didn't really tick any buttons that was going to get me into really learning as I should. So, like people like Carter G. Woodson, who we celebrate today because he is the OG of the Black History Month. It was people like him who worked by day, who became an academic and studied at night, but self-taught. People like Malcolm X and others who went to prison and then found his books in prison, in terms of his redemption and his understanding about not only then his own culture, but then about the culture of others, and reading books like H.G. Wells and others. This gave me a path that, whatever I'd gone through at school, which was quite torrid for me and not a great experience, didn't have to define my life. And so I read voraciously about the story of the civil rights in the US. Apartheid fascinated me, and then suddenly and it also built up my own identity about me as a black man growing up in Britain, with all these factors around me about how I came to be there. Why, when people said go back home, why was I feeling so confused and down? Because I was born in London. I was living here in Bristol. Where do they mean home? Does they mean home but the Caribbean? So lucky enough, as I said, I went to the Caribbean. Apart from, they just told me I was an English boy and sent me back with a smile, of course, and a few rums. So home wasn't then. My spiritual home would always be the mother country of Africa. My sister went there, and she lived there for 10 years as a Rastafarian and is buried there to this day. But my home was in the soil of this country, as a personal opinion. And it's for me to build that, my own story, my own legacy around what that meant to be not just a black man in the African diaspora, but someone who's born black and been very proud to be British as well as Bristol. In order to do that, I had to go through my own history, learn how my parents come over from and what they'd done, and then to seeing a black man as president on the 20th of January 2009. I was there for that momentous day, and I saw Barack Obama's inauguration. At the same time, another Bristolian had met and married her love of her life, and they had a baby on that day, and decided to combine all these events of what I learned. I turned it into a book about my social history, about British history, where I talk about the Windrush experiences, but also that fascination with the evils of the Deep South and that cancerous apartheid system that come from the Civil War, and Dr. King was fighting for a century later, that came into things like mass incarceration of black men, right up to travels within New Orleans in my next book, but also just that we weren't, as W.E. Du Bois had said, confined to just one place. We had this, I felt this double consciousness, and then looked at further, places like Frantz Fanon from Martinique, our own Paul Gilroy, whose son teaches with us, had written about this, Ain't No Black in the Union Jack, and again this spoke about this double consciousness, being in one place but feeling part of something that's wider and bigger. And I through that self-education and narrative, with a great deal of support from friends and family, including people I work with at UWE, I discovered my true finding, and I'm here lecturing you and teaching with you and sharing with you today. I'm pleased from it. Can I have the next slide, please? A little dip into some of the things that I discovered. You know, I talked about the Windrush generation coming, and you know, that family connection. Those, my sisters are there, handmade by my mother, seamstress. Those, you know, remember her on. I just left her yesterday in London. I was on the Singer sewing machines. Making those things, because they didn't have a lot of money then, so you made your own dresses. You get those, you buy your patterns, and you would make them, or commission someone else. My sister celebrated her 65th birthday just this a weekend. Was great, again another inspiration. When we looked into some of our photographs, what did I see? I saw a gentleman there. That's my grandfather on the far right, a mason. A mason as part of the empire. A mason is part of somebody who had given his children, my paternal grandfather, given his children over to Britain to help rebuild the country. That's how connected that they were. And it's for part of those reasons, and also that, you know, I accepted my MBE, because wherever I looked, I couldn't get away from it. And partly I couldn't look and you know, deny that day at the palace from those two women in the middle, and my mother and my sister. So that's all part of that story, and I'm happy to take questions about that as well. Can I have the next slide, please? Paul Stevenson's been very much an inspiration in terms of not only his travels, and in terms of he didn't actually get to South Africa, but going to America, and also but his activism within the local community as well. And in terms of my times at GMA, I've left my leadership role. That is Martin Luther King III. I got to meet him. So the son of Dr. King. But I also had a personal connection. I've got family over in the US. My uncle became the first black bishop of Connecticut in America, and my partners later became is American as well. So lots of connections through volunteering in New Orleans, through the mean streets then of Brooklyn, and now very gentrified now. But that gave me a sense of something, of being an activist, that I would have to continue this journey. That now that Roy and Barbara and Paul and many others had done their share of the journey in terms of getting the baton round and fighting for equality, my turn had come to take things forward, which I'm pleased to say I did within GMA, and I continue now to do with Creative Connects and my partners, including UWE. Next slide, please. So just looking at just some of those, I mean, there were so many I could spend the whole an hour just on that one lecture alone, on that one picture alone. But just in terms of the contribution of of our communities, from in terms of its legacy, from, don't forget, the passing of that equalities rights. These became later Diane Abbott. Bernie Grant was another one. The arts have been kind of reinvigorated in terms of our great artists and authors now, Mallory Blackman, and great to see that significant taken up positions, particularly at the University of Manchester. We can, we shouldn't be in competition, but we should applaud the steps taken to bring in great talent from the communities, from arts and culture, like Gary Young, like Lem Sasay, Benjamin Zephaniah at Birmingham, and say, well, help us shape what we've got coming forward for the future in terms of creating young minds. So you don't have to get people like myself having to wade through other people's texts and thinking, well, that ain't right, or someone telling me about my culture who doesn't really know much about it. These should be alongside people who contextualize, and people like me with lived and learned experience. Think about our sport. From Linford Christie back then, Tessa Sanderson, right the way through the country of Somalia as part of the Commonwealth, Mo Farah, that's been given. Think about an Olympic Games and what would mean to Britain without any of us being here. If you'd have listened to people like Enoch Powell, who did his Rivers speech not long after Dr. King was assassinated, only a matter of days, within April 1968, then those things wouldn't have been happening. Selene Henry, a great campaigner, Janet Kay from Lovers Rock, back then, invented here in the UK, as was grime and jungle and many other genres. That drum that comes through, that sound there, that comes from Africa. All of those things that have been there, those sound systems, that Bristol sound. Many of our students that are engaged and love coming from that nightlife, again, coming out of Africa via the Caribbean and Jamaican sound systems that were produced there from Massive Attack and Portishead. Even our arts that we now look upon, and our street art looks fantastic. Again, another borrowed culture from the streets out of the Bronx and America that Banksy's made famous. He's not painting Rembrandt. That's street culture that's there. And then back to kind of that soul to soul, that in the late 80s going through the 90s, that gave us a true sense of being black and British. Not for everybody, but certainly in terms of just trying to chase your roots and roots. And then in football, I picked the 3 degrees there, the OGs, the 3 of the original players for England. Laurie Cunningham was the first player to represent England at international level. Viv Anderson was 78 a little while later. But when you think of Jofra Archer winning a World Cup, Jason Robinson, who won the World Cup in rugby, his father's Jamaican. These are the great stories, and many more that we have contributed and still struggle for true recognition. So when we talk about Britain, when we talk about Bristol, we talk about empire, we're talking about all of these things. Those are the legacies, and it came out of that legacy that was built from that day of 28th of August 1963. So in being excited by that, we've got a project that's going to be starting soon. It's called Generations. I'm going to invite community members and leaders to talk about their specialist subject and give mini lectures. And then we're going to ask for an artistic response from our students, from our community members. I remember, just being inspired by community learning and learning, and I want to extend that opportunity to our students, to Black, Asian, minority students, give them some support and close that gap, but also our community members as well. So we're going to do that online. There's more details about that to follow. And finally, that completes my verbal update. Paul is still with us. He's got his book, Memoirs of a Black Englishman, written by himself and Elliot Morrison. You can see in that picture. We still continue with our Bristol bus boycott committee and still continue, hopefully, to educate people about Bristol, Britain, and the story of the Bristol bus boycott and its legacy to the UK and the world. Thank you. I'd delight to take questions.
Thank you so much, Roger, for such a in-depth and kind of very much contextualizing the history of Bristol and just the wider history that everyone probably isn't very familiar with, but definitely that everyone needs to know. So thank you so much for that. We are now going to be able to take questions. Bear with me just a second whilst I do a screen share, and you will be able to have the instructions in terms of how we're going to do that today. So you should all be able to see my screen right now. Yes, you should all be able to see my screen right now. And so the way we're going to do it, you'll be able to send questions on menti.com, either on your phone or on your desktop, and then type in the code is written on the screen, and there you'll be able to submit your questions, and then I will be able to moderate them, and they will be shared with you, and we'll be able to answer them for the next 20 minutes before we close. So I will give a few minutes for people to be able to submit their questions through with us. We're going to give a few more moments, and then I'll be picking.
If anyone's having difficulty figuring out how to do what's on the screen, it should be self-explanatory, but drop us a line if you're struggling.
I'm going to start showing the questions on the screen now. So and I'm hoping it's going to work. Yes. Okay. So both informative and inspiring, Roger. Thank you. In your talk, you spoke about the fact that you hated history at school and stressed the need for curriculum reform. Wait a second, because this is a two-part question. Curriculum reform, bear with. You will know that this is a big issue at UE. What should the university's next steps with regards to integrating Black and Bristol history into course curricula and reduce the significant gaps?
Well, we've taken some steps along that, and I've been delighted to be, sharing that that journey. I was employed, a lady called Lynn Barlow took a chance on me and just engaged me with the university generally. But I'm only one person. There are many others within Bristol, and it's now for probably to connect with more local guest speakers, I would say, who would be paid as guest speakers to come in and deliver areas of expertise, like I'm going to do with the Windrush project, and drip feed that into each and every relevant, or even if it's not relevant, I think people, because it's the area that a lot of people go on to live in, should be aware of. I think that will influence their work. I think that will influence their play. I think that will influence Bristol for the better in terms of, and I stress both Caribbean and Black Bristol and African Bristol as well, but also our lower income areas in Hartcliffe and Lawrence Weston, where I used to live. There's great projects, Ambition Lawrence Weston, and Mark Peppers doing a great job down there, who can just talk about whether it's on the environment and their wind farm there, or again, that sense of community and that's given back. I would urge those things are taken forward. Barn Hill being another one. There used to be settlements all over, set up by University of Bristol, of course, but we can reintroduce that more community work, and we've done a lot on that. And I know the community fund has really helped on that. And it's I was just at a talk today with Jamie, and hearing Precious speak about the importance of working with communities. Jamie Darwin, that is. As well. So steps are being taken. Unfortunately, we know that the period of change isn't as fast as we want to become, but I was, the recommendation that I already put forward, you've embraced. There's always much more to be done, but we're on the way.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Does anybody else have any questions, or does anyone want to either put them in the chat or submit them through Menti meter? Thank you for that comment, Joe. That's a really beautiful comment. It shows that this evening has had quite a strong impact. I've had the Mentimeter on my side has crashed, so unfortunately we'll need to rely on the chat for questions instead of Mentimeter, so apologies everyone for that. So if anyone has any questions, are you able to post them in the chat, and then we'll be able to answer them as we go along?
Yeah, that'd be great if we could put it in the chat.
Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Valerie. I thought someone was going to ask me this, but if you're talking about legacies, how well Bristol isn't doing it. It's a kind of twin track approach. One is very, 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 very slowly, and we see that globally in terms of the discussions that we've had. The fact I left school in '81 without any qualifications. 10 years later, I did a positive action scheme. Positive action scheme was open because of the lack of employment for Black people that we now know as people of colour in housing and across most of the employment fields. And very much the work I do focuses on the economic model of racism. We've got lots of different other things that we can discuss, but unless people are putting money in their pockets, so they can feed themselves, so they can have their own housing, so they can even enjoy the quality of life that I've gone on to in terms of travel, and have that security. Then we're just playing with the words around racism and inequality. It has to be based on the economic model, and that's the same model that's been handed down to me from people like Marcus Garvey and Malcolm X, I would argue. What I would say about as I've said, I don't have so much fear about the police so much, but I'm in a different position. I look at the word privilege now, something I've struggled to kind of understand, and because I'm well connected within Bristol, I have a lot of privilege. I live in from where I am now. I'm not in my council flat any longer. I own my own home. So I think the gaps are still vast. I think we've made strides forward this year. I looked at my training notes. I've been an quality trainer for 30 years, and what you call institutional racism, as we went through. I wrote on a Macpherson report from the sad murder of Stephen Lawrence that followed. Now, when we talk about structural and systematic racism, that's what we're talking about. That things are in the system. That things that we know, and people are more aware of this is something that is more. Sure, we've still got direct and verbal and indecent in terms of the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor as well. But what we've got is structures and systems that are institutionally keep our best talent, I argue, back. Whether that's the amount that black graduates are paid, whether that's like me still occurring, people doing very well at primary school, going into senior school and going into that secondary slide. That slide that again goes in from the playground straight into the prison pipeline. The disproportionate sentences, the housing occurrences, the economic gaps that I've hinted at, gaps in our top jobs in the media and such like. Every issue or theme that you want to point to, and you can see those structures. Some of them that have been based in centuries of whether it's shadism from people who are as dark as me, that stretches back to the plantation, right the way through to just have the fear of black men, where it was something that I challenged the Bristol Post with, and then went on to work with in terms of our city conversations and getting people to talk about racism. We have these things that have been there for centuries that still echo into today's climate. So there's a long way to go. Not as much and as far as was. I've just seen the film Mangrove, and just that oppression that was there from the police is no longer as there. But that doesn't mean to say it's good. When I talk to our young people now, they say, look, yeah, that's great, Rog. You had your time, it's great, but we're not interested in how bad it was, and we don't want to see any like 6 times as much. We want 0. We want to be stopped as infrequently as our white counterparts, and not be that based on some racial profile. And I'm like, yes, you know what, you're right, absolutely. So we obviously I've now learned things since working at the university, such as nuance and balance, these things, and complexities. These things aren't in any way easy solutions, but I can contextualize that in terms of its history and move in the right way, sadly through murder, sadly through injustice, but it has taken things forward.
Thank you so much for that. We have a question from Nia saying, is there anything you can recommend to cultural organisations to celebrate or educate in some of the aspects in Bristol's current climate that you mentioned, e.g. sports or music, and music.
Nia, do you mean borrowed as in culturally inappropriate, or do you mean shared? I'm not sure what the borrowed means, but we're obviously in Black History Month now, but we say Black History Month is 365 days a year. Employing people, as I've said, employing artists, employing community leaders, having talks, having this, I'm just one person. I'm able to manage to get a lot of different experiences in from people that I've met and been inspired by. But there are many others within Bristol who can give those experiences. People who have just come to the country. I'd love to know. We're all learning on this. I don't know much about the Somali country culture or Sudanese culture. So we're all on that journey. We share the same skin color, but totally different cultures, and they educate me in terms of what we need to do. As many as we do, even when I work with the LGBTQ community in terms of non-binary and its use of and gender. So as many different cultures and communities as you can get, as many different celebrations that you can have. There, use the cultural calendar, I would argue. We have Diwali, we have Ramadan, we have Black History Month, we have LGBT, as Valerie was saying, Louise was saying at the beginning, LGBTQ months, and celebrate things that are cross identity in terms of let's look at something like Stonewall, for instance. Stonewall actually came about from a black trans man who was a part of that. Let's look at the things that happened in America. As a black woman that was occurred in terms of the female gender campaign. Sorry, it escapes me at the moment. So you can look at things kind of across a range of different facets into doing that.
Thank you so much for that. We have another question from Joanna. So concerning the hostile environment immigration policy, which limits people who don't have ID from being employed, specifically towards the Windrush generation, what is being done to help those in the Windrush generation to get jobs? I ask this because upon arrival, many of them were not given proper evidence of British citizenship.
So the Windrush scandal, as we call it, is an interesting one, because I don't want our whole experience to be defined by a policy that was instigated by the then Home Secretary Theresa May, and then taken forward by Amber Rudd, and then proliferated from Theresa May's presidency. But that had been permeated within the community for a number of years. It wasn't important, to kind of get your papers. You just thought you were part of the system until it then became important. So a number of people have been working, Joanna, in perversely called the black economy. So they had the skills. They'd been working, but what they hadn't was the documentation to prove it. And I just asked. I was with my mum the other day. I was just asking for a telephone bill. She was scrambling around to find something. We don't keep those things in their right places. Some people do have all their their papers lined up, but a lot of people don't. So in terms of jobs and employment, that's where we are now, and especially in the COVID times, now that we're in this kind of triple pandemic, even quadruple pandemic, and that I mean health pandemic, from COVID, from that I mean environmental pandemic that we've been in for obviously several years, but and then during this year is the racial pandemic that we're in, and also the pandemic we're just sliding into. It's going to be institutions as they've been during the recession, like the universities, that are going to be assisted in putting that right, either through courses, community learning, upskilling people whose jobs are now gone through no fault of their own, retraining, reinvention. I've had to go through that process. I used to work in the buildings. I used to work as a government officer. So that's going to be part of things that people are just going to have to get used to in terms of retraining for other things whilst they're chosen career, especially if you're in the arts and culture field, as from the last question, as we wait for the theatres to open. And I know that because I've got a play waiting to come off the page at any day, based on President Barack Obama's life, goes through. So it's kind of a convoluted question, and sorry, an answer to your a question to focus on just that sector of people. I think that's going to be now wider. We've been overtaken by events of COVID, about retraining, about employment, about making sure that the information is there. And this also goes to our students as well, many of which who relied on remittances to send home. That was a big, when I worked with Alicia on that, was a big thing, was what had been reported. Well, they couldn't work any longer, so they were sending money back home. 4 times as much money gets sent back to the second countries than Britain gives in aid. So those are big consequences going on across the globe and across the diasporas of where people come from, that we have to kind of get our heads around in this economic pandemic, and one of the things that we have to shift for. Me too, thank you. Forgot it. And then sectionality slipped out of my head as well. Thank you, Azabs, for those things put forward.
Thank you so much, Roger. Does anybody else have any other questions that they would like to ask? We have another 5 or so minutes for questions.
What do I think 2021 holds, Valerie? Right, I wasn't going to, because I didn't see Brexit coming. Didn't even see Barrett coming, and I certainly didn't see Trump coming. I wasn't alone in not seeing the latter, and bearing in mind it's less than 100,000 votes. I have seen a systematic shift in hardening of attitudes across countries, and so this goes beyond race. When I look at the present Indian government, Israeli government, Urban in Hungary, I think the Polish government as well. I've seen this, the leader of Turkey as well. I've seen this dictator regime, strongman, hard man, that has been ridiculed throughout the African and Caribbean countries, take hold and take root. Bolsonaro, another one in Brazil, and it's been exposed during COVID, and obviously I believe it's exposed Trump to his detriment. So I think the things will start to return back to some semblance of order post 2021, with the election of Joe Biden on the 20th of January 2021. No one can predict about of COVID and the like, but I'd like to see, although we're on some post-traumatic stress, I want to see some post-traumatic growth, and growth in that spirit. That I talked about that community spirit for a reason earlier. I put those slides up for a reason, to say that these people were in adversity, didn't have much, but they came together. I think we can still do that, whether it's we're coming together now online, whether it's caring for our neighbours, care for those disadvantaged, whether it's convincing people with billions and trillions in their accounts just how much do they need. When I listen to some of the fights that come out of the US, I'm thinking, how much actual money does one person need to get by? When you look at the inequalities in health systems and the like, and the same here. I was just watching the for COVID and the day rate for the test and trace consultants on 7,000 a day. I can tell you, I'm a consultant. I'm nowhere near 7,000 a day. I think it's something like over $1 million a month. It's a really good piece of journalism from Sky News on that. So I want to see this the inequality gap closed. I want to see us coming together. But I want to see people being held to account for the We've had a lot of talk around, if I just paraphrase it, within the Black Lives Matter movement. I want to see those actions now taking fruition. You've had a little time to ponder that by the time we come to the end of the year. So what are your green shoots? I'd like to see some of those start to dismantle systematic racism. So yes, I've got great hopes, or better hopes. For it can't get any worse, surely. Otherwise, if it is, you'll see me in a raggedy t-shirt eating out of a can of beans, shooting cockroaches down from the ceiling and stopping the zombies from trying to break in, because that is the actual next worst scenario. I started the year in San Francisco, New Year's Eve. I left there. I was in Alabama and Mississippi and New Orleans doing some field research. I had no idea that my world was going to be changed upside down. I've had to change my company and the like, and its values, because we're now online. But change is something that we're going to have to adapt to. It's going to be the key thing. So we're going to have to, some are going to go slowly towards it. Got Brexit around the corner again, like with COVID. No idea what's going to happen with that. So those are a couple of those key things I think that we can do.
Thank you so much, Roger. I'd love to kind of bring one question. Well, it's not a question. I'm going to be one of those annoying people. It's not quite a question, but I just wanted to ask. But in terms of UE specific, in terms of what do you, obviously you're one of our academics here, like what do you feel the UE as an institution, organisation should be doing more of or less of in terms of to fully kind of advance race and equality, and especially with the current climate that we're in terms of the role that universities have in kind of being part of the change within society? It's a bit of a big question, but
it's huge. But that's fine. I'll do it in 3 words. Let's talk more. I think, basically, and that's very simplistic, but I think we've got to get to the action phase, and we've done some of those things. There are going to be a lot more mistakes. There are going to be more incidences that occur. It's getting them dealing with them better, because you're not going to eradicate it. Racism is within any big institution I've worked at with, and with most of them, whether it's the police or the city council. Marvin was eloquently spoke about the issues that he faced from Bristol Post story, but those issues have actually happened. I know people who've worked at city council. I know what I experienced there. It happens in workplaces, but it's how it's dealt with. It's how complaint systems and justice is seen to be dealt with. So it's getting to that action phase of things, and I know that's different difficult in such a febrile times, but it's particularly pointed in terms of a series of actions. And then we do what I've just done. We storybook. We look back and say, this is where we were, this is where we are. We continue to have a wide range of academic teaching and people we can call upon. I've spoken about community learning. I've spoken about community leaders. I've spoken about community education and people who do not think like myself. We've got, I still have to keep pinching myself that people call me a lecturer, because they're like, well, I can still remember staring at the classroom, looking at Henry VIII or whatever wife he did or didn't have, and the head's rolling off. Didn't do anything for me then, so I can still remember back then. But now this is where I am now, and I know that there are other community leaders, and working with Dr. Manuel Duque and the likes, and bringing through people like Zabs in terms of into leadership positions who can take the mantle forward. Paul Ower's now got his a faculty. So that's a key sign of things that are to be done. There'll be a lot of pressure on there, quite rightly, but that gives me inspiration. Yeah, you're taking this seriously now, because I know Paul's a man of action, and things will occur from there. Not everything is going to happen overnight. Racism will still occur tomorrow morning, sadly, but it's another key step on the progress. So as I say, this is no silver bullet stuff where you just, if I could just hand everything, to everybody on the call and just say, yeah, all you have to do is take these for the next month and then racism be cured. No, it's going to be 1,001, more than 1,001 different solutions. Some will fail, but you've got to take those brave, courageous first steps. And I believe that we at U Bristol are doing that. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. I'd rather be. I've given up my leadership position to work and engage with you and you all to take this forward. I know it's not easy, but I'm well up for the challenge for the people around me, including yourself, Louise. You're one of our next people we're going to be pushing into that position.
Thank you very much for your lovely words, Roger. And on that note, we are beautifully closing our event on time. And I just wanted to say a note of thanks to Roger again for your expertise, your academic expertise, your lived experience, and just the endless amount of time and commitment you provide to us here at UE Bristol and within the Bristol community. Please do take the time to fill out our survey, because that's very important for us to make sure that we are delivering engagement activities that are of interest and that are working for our staff and students and our community members. Valerie has very kindly posted in the chat all our upcoming events that are happening. There are events organised centrally by the Equality, Diversity and Inclusivity Team, some that are organised within Equity, and some others from other faculties. So please do engage, get involved, share with your colleagues and friends, because it is important for universities to host these events, but is also even more important for staff and students to engage and to take part when these events occur. So thank you so much for everyone's contribution. Do continue to follow us on Twitter at UE Equality, and thank you to Vicky, who has been tweeting throughout this event. And if you have any other questions that you may want to ask us as a team about Black History Month or any equality, diversity and inclusivity issues, then please don't hesitate to email us at edi@ue.ac.uk. Thank you again, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Roger, for speaking. And the recordings of this event will be available in November, so do keep an eye out. But mainly thank you, everyone, and hope you all have a really lovely evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you again, Roger. Amazing, fantastic.
Great, thanks. I enjoyed that. It was good. Don't know when that hour and a half went, but yeah, it's good.
The slides were powerful. The things you said were powerful, deep, challenging, honest, searing. I don't have enough adjectives.
Great, thank you. Appreciate it. I couldn't remember where you're from in the States. You're West Coast. No, you're Virginia. That's it.
The nation's capital, Washington, D.C., 60% Black.
Right.
A little known fact. Well, I lived in Virginia, but I'm from Washington, D.C.
Yeah, you lived in Virginia.
Thank you, Joe, for being with us this evening, and your suggestions in the chat really helpful. This was an open event for everyone.